Yesterday, our allies in the United Arab Emirates announced the fact that 19 entities and individuals have been prescribed and put on their watch list for terrorists. Links are crossed. Very sadly, 8 of those entities exist in the UK and operatively and are not prescribed. So, could who have a statement by our government minister early next week on what action the government is going to take following the actions of the United Arab Emirates to make sure that these Islamist terrorist groups who are linked to the Muslim Brotherhood are prescribed in the UK and not allowed to operate freely. Before we continue, do us a little favor by subscribing to the channel, because over 98% of you watching haven't subscribed. It cost you nothing, not even a penny, to join this channel. Have you subscribed? Thanks so much. Of the United Emirates, the United Arab Emirates, prescribing individuals, he knows that we are close allies with that country. We work very closely with them, and I will ensure there is a ministerial response on the matter and the action that the subsequent action that the government is taking on those individuals. Richard Ty. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, what actions will the Home Secretary be taking following the news that 8 companies and organizations have been deemed terror groups by the United Arab Emirates? The UAE is an important international point for the UK, but of course other countries have their own rules on designation, and it would not be appropriate for the government to comment on their processes. What I can say to the honourable member is that extremism has no place in our society, and that we work very closely with local communities and our international partners to tackle groups and edit individuals who seek to sow division. And some months ago, we all missed Thessines. Senior Labour ministers were confronted with accusations that our so-called Muslim terror group was operating openly in the UK, while the government refused to take action. And mate, when I tell you the Commons atmosphere was hotter than a chicken shop on a Friday night, I mean MPs were practically vibrating with tension. It started when a male Conservative MP stood up, straightened his papers was about to drop the gospel, and said that several of Britain's close Middle Eastern allies had officially designated a list of organizations as dangerous extremist groups. Yet, unbelievably, 8 of those same organizations were still active here in the UK. The whole chamber froze. You could practically hear an aide's pen snap somewhere behind the speech. The MP pressed the government, saying the public deserved answers, not waffle, not spin, not more will review it nonsense. And to be fair, he wasn't even raising his voice. He didn't need the weight of the allegation did Orth shouting for him. He added that ordinary Brits were watching all this chaos unfold while paying higher taxes, dealing with rising crime and seeing polar stretch thin, yet extremist linked groups were popping about freely. His words, not mine, and the government was still twiddling its thumbs. Social media had already erupted. Hours earlier, with posts trending under tags like "Wake Up Labour" and "Protect Britain," and people arguing back and forth on whether the government was being too cautious, too slow, or just hiding behind bureaucracy. By the time finished, all eyes were on the minister at the dispatch box, a senior female minister responsible for security, and you could see her blinking like she'd just walked out of a steam room. The pressure was unreal. She stood up, cleared her throat, and went for the classic polished government defense. She acknowledged that the UAE was a closely the Britain worked with them, that intelligence sharing was ongoing, all the diplomatic lines they always roll out. but she insisted that the UK had its own designations, process, and that London couldn't just copy and paste in other countries' decisions. And listen, that might sound reasonable in a textbook, but in the heat of the Commons, it landed like a wet tissue. MPS, on all sides, looked unconvinced. O'Nevin muttered, loud enough for the microphones to pick it up. "Here we go again." What made the moment even sharper was what happened next. Another male MPN known for his nonsense style jumped in and asked the minister directly what exact actions the Home Secretary had taken since the news broke. He wanted specific meetings, assessments, instructions to securitize devices, anything to show the government actually cared. But the minister repeated the same line, that every country had its own process. Thatch couldn't comment on other nations' decisions, and that the UK would continue working with partners. She emphasized that extremism had no place in British society, which is the sort of thing every minister says, just before saying they can't actually do anything immediately. That was the moment the mood turned, because the angry looks around the chamber weren't from just one side. It was across the board. MPs from Labour, Tory, Reform, even some independents are visibly agitated, shaking their heads, whispering to Kaligasexung looks like, is that it? The public reaction outside Parliament was even fiercer. Today, hundreds of social media posts went viral with clips of the exchange, captioned with things like, "Why is the UK always last to act?" and "Are ministers scared to upset someone?" A few clips even edited dramatic music behind a video. And trust me, those clips hit millions of views before the Langtime news even began. It became the latest chapter in a storyline that's been brewing for weeks. The government rightly being accused of being too soft on extremism, while being too hard on average Brit is just trying to get on with life. And that's where the emotional weight of this whole saga comes in. Because while politicians stated designation processes and diplomatic sensitivities, people outside Parliament were thinking about their kids walking home from school, their partners taking the late bus, their neighborhoods changing faster than they could keep up. Everyday citizens want clarity. They want honesty. They want to know that the government doesn't wait for a tragedy before acting. And the tension, that clash between elite processes and ordinary fear, is what brought so much fire to the Commons. Meanwhile, international shockwaves were already spreading. The UAE, one of Britain's strongest allies, encountered a strategy, had to take decisive action within their borders, and people naturally asked, if they see a threat, why don't we? Journalists in Europe picked up the story by the evening, with French and German outlets reporting on Britain's hesitation. An Italian paper even went with a headline suggesting Britain didn't want to often certain political groups. Whether that's true or not, the perception alone is politically dangerous. Diplomats in London were reportedly scrambling behind closed doors, trying to keep partnerships, especially as the Middle East remains a hotbed of sensitive alliances, conflicts, and intelligence operations. Hours after the Commons clash, more political shockwaves hit when a Reform MP gave a fiery statement outside Westminster. And mate, when I say fiery, I mean he practically set the pavamental light. He accused the government of fighting behind procedure and claimed Thatchertain ministers were too afraid of community backlash to protect the British public. His words, the clip of that went viral in minutes. Journalists timidly swarmed him, asking if he was accusing Labour of prioritizing political correctness over security. Hadn't deny it. Inside Parliament, the fallout continued. Whips were seen having tense conversations with backbench MPs, Rumours flew that some Labour MPs were furious the minister had made them look weak on national security, especially after weeks of pressure over immigration numbers, asylum backlogs, and the surge in protests around the country. Yesterday's London demonstration had tens of thousands on the streets again, waving banners, chanting, blocking roads, and creating the kind of scenes that always light up social media, but leave the public wondering, is anyone actually in charge? And this is where the story hits its dramatic peak. Late last night, several internal government sources leaked that there was disagreement inside Labour leadership about how to. Some believed the group should be reviewed immediately to avoid political embarrassment. Others warned that acting too fast could trigger legal battles, accusations of discrimination, diplomatic headaches. Reports even claimed the Home Office was in panic mode, trying to assemble emergency briefing documents before morning. Meanwhile, opposition MPs continued demarring Labour online, with some suggesting the government had lost control of national security. Memes popped up comparing ministers to fire alarms with dead batteries. Harsh beauty shows you where the public mood is. By dawn, the situation escalated even more dramatically. A major UK newspaper and a front-page story titled "Why Want Labour Act?" and inside it listed elite organisations named abroad, something ministers desperately hoped wouldn't become front-page material. Bimade number 10 was forced to respond through a spokesperson, insisting there was no threat to the British public and accusing certain commentators of whipping up unnecessary fear. But by then, the damage was already done. The perception was planted. Labour had been warned by allies, yet still hadn't. Political commentators on morning TV were brutal. One said, "This is Labour's first real national security test, and they're tripping over their own shoelaces." Another said, "It's not what ministers do that matters. It's what they are seen to be afraid of doing. Ouch." And then the collapse moment when everything cracked at once. In the afternoon, another MP tried to ask the minister a follow-up question, pushing her to confirm whether the government would at least begin a review. And thought, when